Hello gardening friends and welcome to All About Gardening. My name is Madison and today we are talking about these adorable little plants over here called string of hearts. It's very easy to see why they are called that because these plants have very long vines with teeny tiny little semi-succulent leaves that look just like hearts. They're not the most popular of houseplants. You'll see them pop up around Valentine's Day every year. But they definitely deserve a place in your collection. They're very low maintenance. Thanks to their semi-succulent leaves, they don't need watering very often. And also, they are very easy to propagate. There's 4 ways we're going to look at today, but there are many, many more. And we're going to go through each one step by step. The 2 propagation methods we're going to look at first both involve taking cuttings. This is the simplest method of propagation and the most common, because as you can see, these vines get very long and tend to be unruly, they become tangled, and they just look a bit messy. So whenever you need to give the plant a trim, you can use those cuttings to propagate even more plants. I've split it into 2 separate methods because the one involves rooting in soil and the other involves rooting in water, but the process of taking the cuttings is the same. First, we're going to start with one of the easiest propagation methods, rooting cuttings in water. All you need is a glass of water, preferably filtered or distilled, and a sharp pair of pruning shears. Now, looking at the plant here, I want to tidy it up a bit and keep this heart shape without too many vines dangling around the sides. So I'm going to pick one of these vines over here to trim off the plant and propagate. You want to cut just below a set of leaves, as these nodes are where the roots will emerge from and they need to be submerged in water. So I'm going to trim with a bit of a gap from the node to make sure I don't damage it. And there you've got your cutting. Now I'm going to remove the leaves from the bottom half of this cutting. You need a minimum of 1 node exposed, but preferably 2 or 3 just to give you better chances. And it also helps with rooting because these leaves can't be left below the waterline. So removing the bottom ones gives you enough of the vine to anchor without letting any of the leaves sit in water. So I've removed the bottom half of the leaves and we still have a few leaves at the top. This spindly growth that wasn't really getting enough light isn't going to help us much either. It's just going to draw energy, so I'm going to trim that off as well. So now we've got the cutting ready to root in water. Depending on your chosen glass, this can be the slightly tricky part. You just need to make sure the leaves are hooked onto the edge so that the nodes are exposed, but the leaves aren't left below the waterline. So there you can see we've got the node at the bottom and there's another 2 submerged in the water, and there's a couple of lovely leaves on the sides. I would do a couple of these at once because you don't want to propagate just one vine, you need a lot so that when you eventually root them in soil, you've got a full and wonderful plant. I've made a few more cuttings to pop into this glass of water, and now I'm going to leave the glass in a warm spot away from direct sun to develop roots. You'll need to change the water every couple of days to prevent bacterial growth and also to make sure there's enough oxygen in the water for the roots to develop successfully. Now I'm going to set that aside and get ready for the next method, which is rooting in soil. To get started, I'm going to grab one of my recycled plastic pots and my favorite propagating mix. I use this for pretty much everything. It's a mixture of equal parts coconut coir and perlite, so it drains really well, but it also holds on to enough moisture to promote root growth. So I'm going to fill this pot with my propagating mix, ready to plant. When taking cuttings, you have a couple of options. The first is exactly the same as when rooting in water. So I'm going to take this extra long vine here, trim it off, and then I've got a cutting here. So all I would do is remove the leaves from the bottom half, probably up to here, I would say. Make a hole in the soil with my finger, root it, and leave the excess vine to hang along the sides of the pot. You can do a couple of cuttings in the same container to develop roots, and then when you replant into houseplant potting mix, you can group them all together to have a more full plant. But that's not the only option that you have. You can also replicate how these plants reproduce naturally when they creep along the soil. So I'm just circling this cutting along the pot so that each of the nodes are in contact with the soil, like that. And then when the soil is moist, it will encourage roots to grow at the nodes and develop downwards into the soil. The only reason I don't really like this method is because you can't guarantee that the leaves won't rot. It's very difficult to keep the soil moist enough for roots to develop, but keep the leaves off the soil at the same time to prevent them from rotting. You can use pins to keep them in the soil and lift these leaves out, but it does get a bit tricky and you need to be more vigilant when using this method. The final option you have is very similar to this one. It just requires slightly smaller cuttings. They're called butterfly cuttings because of the way they are cut. So all you're going to do is trim the vine on either side of one set of leaves, and then that is your whole cutting. So very similar, you're just going to lay it on the soil so that the node is in contact with the soil but the leaves aren't, and then roots will develop downwards. This also does take a little bit longer to develop because it's only one set of leaves, but you can get a lot more cuttings out of one vine when making butterfly cuttings. So the choice is yours. I tend to prefer rooting them much like you would root in water. I've had more success with it. It just leads to stronger growth and I don't really have to worry about the cuttings as much. So I'm going to bury this one here. And then all you have to do is water for roots to develop. And then you'll have a brand new plant in a couple of weeks. Although propagating from cuttings is the most popular method, it's definitely not the only option you have. The interesting growth habit of these plants means you can also propagate from aerial tubers. If you take a look at the vines, you could see little bumps on them that look very similar to the larger tubers that you may see in the soil. Now, to propagate from these and for it to develop into one of these bigger tubers here, all you need to do is grab your propagating mix in a container about the same height as the previous one or one smaller. Lay the vine along the soil so that the tuber is buried, and then simply pin it down on either side. Once the tuber is in contact with the soil, it will start to develop roots, it will grow bigger, and then you can cut it off this main plant here. The reason you keep it on the vine is just so that it can draw nutrients from the main plant to grow before being cut off to grow on its own. The final method is not really a method of propagation, but it is a way to make your plants look fuller and to develop more roots. That simply involves taking a very long vine that may not be growing as well and looping it around to plant back into the same pot. So much like propagating from cuttings, it will develop roots here, the vines can grow extra long, and then you can trim this loop so that more vines cascade down the sides. If your plant moves often, you might have trouble keeping these in place, which is why you use a trusty pin to pin it down. I like using hairpins. Makes it easier to just pin on either side of the vine and press it into the soil. As long as there's contact with the soil, roots will develop, and then you can trim this vine over here and leave the rest to hang down the sides, and it will continue growing fuller and healthier. If you want some more detail on the propagating process or on string of hearts in general, you can check out allaboutgardening.com or stick around on our YouTube channel for more essential houseplant tips and tricks.